The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We've talked about how difficult it is to get the full data in the United States about how many people are killed by police officers. And The Guardian, the British newspaper The Guardian, has put together a really good tool to try to summarize all of the police killing that we see. We have data for 2015, and some of the pieces of data are certainly worthy of discussion. For example, there are only 4 states in the U.S. so far which in 2015 have not seen police kill anybody. Those 4 states are Rhode Island, the Dakotas, North and South Dakota, and Vermont. The only states where in 2015 a police officer has not killed a civilian. Leading the country in 2015 in per capita police killings is Oklahoma, followed by Arizona. I don't think we're surprised with that. Nebraska, Hawaii and Alaska, Idaho and New Mexico. Now let's talk about that a little bit. Arizona, we knew about. We've talked about issues with police violence in Arizona. I'm not at all surprised. Hawaii and Alaska are interesting to me. Alaska is very, very rural. And of course, these are per capita numbers. I understand that. But the issue in Alaska, as we've talked about, has been significant alcoholism and drug addiction, and how that leads to confrontations with police very often. And I would be curious if that's part of this.
I have to imagine that has something to do with it. But a lot of guns up there too. So that could be on the minds of police.
And then in New Mexico, we've talked about the Albuquerque Police Department, a several-year history at this point of killing people, homeless people, unarmed people, etc. So that's not at all surprising to see it on the list. If we break it down by cities, the cities that in 2015 so far have seen the most police killing, there have been 9 killed by police in Los Angeles, 7 in Houston, 6 in Phoenix, and San Francisco and Indianapolis tied next with 4. That's a pretty broad range, Lewis, in terms of what the gun laws are in the respective states that we're seeing the most police killings. It's only the beginning of June, and we're only looking at data for this year so far, so it is a relatively small sample. If we look at racial demographics, 472 people have been killed total. 136 of those are black, 28.8%, overrepresented relative to just under 18% of the population. It's only, and I think that what a lot of people don't realize is that you don't hear about it. This is happening so often that you don't hear about it every time it happens. It's only June 5th, but already 6 people have been killed by police this June, including 18-year-old Miguel Martinez, 23-year-old Joseph Ladd, 26-year-olds Usama Rahim and Kamal Dajani. We would have to do our full show every day on police killings to even be able to talk about all of them. Some of that is a result of the fact that this country has over 330 million people living in it. And as a sheer exercise of arithmetic, you're going to have police killings. But we do have an issue in this country with police killings, particularly when you look at gun usage per capita by police in the U.S. versus other countries, particularly countries in Europe.
Yeah, there is a huge problem. It's hard to tackle. And let me add that the only reason we have these numbers is because of journalists and those who seek out the information. The federal government is not keeping track of this.
Right. When the federal government determines that a police killing was justified based on what the circumstances were, the local police will often not even report it to the FBI, and it will never even make it into the federal crime statistics. We talked about this many times, I think maybe towards the beginning of 2015, and that's a really serious issue.
Yeah, just the entire culture around this needs to be changed. Many things need to be changed, and it's an uphill battle.
Former President Bill Clinton's former Secretary of Labor, Robert Reich, has a lot of really interesting content on his website, and he wrote a great article about antitrust and monopolies. And he argues, I would say very, very accurately, that modern antitrust enforcement is very, very weak. Antitrust regulation is supposed to prevent or control trusts or monopolies with the intention of promoting competition in business. We hear from the right all the time, hey, free market, we support a free market. And we know that we don't really have it. Look at what's happening with Tesla within the auto market. Look at what's happening with subsidies of dirty types of energy, which in part is responsible for the lack of development in alternative energy. There's so many industries. Look at the cable industry, telecom, etc. The banks that have engaged in price-fixing conspiracy, their self-described cartel used an exclusive electronic chat room and coded language to manipulate over $5 trillion a day in currency exchange markets. It was, according to Attorney General Loretta Lynch, a, quote, brazen display of collusion, but there's not going to be a trial. No executives are going to go to jail. The banks will continue gambling in the same currency markets, and the fines will be large, but there'll be a tiny fraction of what the banks stand to gain, and it's going to be treated by the bank as, hey, it's the cost of doing business. We make a ton of money doing this stuff. If we get caught, we pay a small fine, and that's that. So we're seeing that there is a total lack of antitrust enforcement, and the result is higher prices for many, many people, higher profits for the few at the top of the food chain. It's an upward distribution, and we see that the right is supposedly against redistribution of wealth, but they seem completely fine with this upward redistribution that's happening as a result of the total lack of antitrust and anti-monopoly enforcement.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it has been determined by by those who would go after the banks and the individuals who are responsible that it's not worth it. That perhaps it's just easier to fine and to settle. And I guess, can you blame them? I mean, can you imagine? This is this could go on. The litigation could go on for years.
I'll give you some more data. Wall Street's 5 largest banks now account for 44% of America's banking assets. That's up from about 25% before the 2008 crash. In 1990, the 5 largest banks only represented 10% of the total banking assets. Americans are spending way more on medications per person than citizens in other developed countries. And a big reason for that is that pharmaceutical companies get to keep their patents going beyond the 20 years they're supposed to run. Drug companies pay the makers of generics to delay cheaper versions, and this costs people huge amounts of money as we see medications monopolized beyond the point where patents are supposed to run out. And then look at health insurance, right? Decades ago, health insurers wrangled from Congress an exemption to antitrust laws, which allowed them to fix prices, allocate markets, and collude over terms of coverage. This has been slightly addressed by the Affordable Care Act, but not much. Too many people, Lewis, are simply not aware. Look at the airline industry. Look at what's going on with airline industry prices. The prices went up for tickets as fuel prices went up. And since fuel prices have gone back down, there have been no discounts. I guess you could argue, well, the prices didn't go up by as much as a result of that. So many industries today, as well as the food industry, where the 4 largest food companies control 82% of beef packing and soybean processing and pork. We have so many monopolies, and people don't even know about it.
People don't know about it. People don't care. Congress doesn't know about it. Of course, all of these, huge corporations, they have their lobbyists, and their claws are dug in deep. And so, let's not forget, too big to fail. There's something to that, too, when talking about a lot of these organizations.
People need to be aware of this. Check out Robert Reich's article. We will link to it in the YouTube description for this clip. And you will also be able to find it very, very easily by Googling Robert Reich Antitrust Monopoly. Fantastic program for you today. Stay tuned.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Remember that you can support the work we do by doing your Amazon shopping after clicking the Amazon banner at davidpakman.com. I recommend bookmarking the link. You can also support the show through the membership program at davidpakman.com/membership. And today's new member of the day is Ray Millione. Ray, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. Join Ray on our website, davidpakman.com/membership. And lastly, the third way to support the work we're doing is make a contribution to our current fundraiser. We're trying to raise $50,000 in 50 days. Go to davidpakman.com. You will see the Indiegogo banner on the right side of the page. Click it, see what perks you like, make a contribution, choose whichever you like. We will keep you apprised of our progress there. 6 years ago this week, General Motors filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The filing reported $82 billion in assets and $172 billion in debt. This was the fourth largest bankruptcy in U.S. history, ranked by assets. Between the sale of assets, which included Saturn, Hummer, and Saab, the loans, and bailout money, General Motors survived. Approximately $51 billion in taxpayer money went towards the bailout, of which $39 million was recovered by the U.S. Treasury after selling its stake in GM.
That's 39 billion.
39 billion. What did I say?
Yeah, 39 million.
39 million. 39 billion was recovered. Some research suggests that the bailout may have saved 1.2 million jobs and $34.9 billion in tax revenue. Mitt Romney said these companies should be allowed to fail. Now, if Mitt Romney had taken over GM, he would have made damn sure that it failed, Lewis, the way he did with so many businesses. President Obama does not really get very much credit for what ultimately happened with GM, the same way that he's ridiculed about funding Tesla. And Tesla now, full disclosure, I own 4 shares of Tesla stock. Tesla now is on fire and paid back the government money way ahead of schedule.
And the same applies to some of the bailouts with the financial institutions.
AIG.
In some cases, in some cases, the government has received more back than they put in, and so I guess this was the right decision. To some extent, I agree with Mitt Romney in that in certain situations, maybe companies should be allowed to fail, but I guess this was not one of those situations.
The thing is, we need consistency, right? Either it's the policy of the government not to get entangled with businesses in such a way that then they've sort of created a responsibility to bail them out, or the government is going to make that type of relationship with businesses a normal thing, and then the bailout of such businesses will also be considered normal. And we've seen this with banks and the concept of too big to fail. The problem I have with all of this is the sort of hypocritical double standard cherry picking, particularly based on whether it's a Republican or a Democrat in office, as to where should money be spent, which companies should be bailed out, which industries should be subsidized. There's really a total lack of consistency when it comes to that.
Yeah, and I think it's clear, you have to weigh how many jobs are you saving, how much, government revenue in the long haul will you be, looking at if you either bail out or let this company fail or industry fail.
Is it an industry where the multiplier effect is higher or lower? Is it an import? Is it a business? Is it an industry or business that exports a lot or that ships jobs overseas? I mean, there's so many ways that we could be looking at this.
Yeah. Is it integral to the, advancement of our technology or infrastructure or education, what have you? I mean, I guess there really is a lot to consider.
4 years ago this week, John Edwards was indicted on multiple felonies surrounding his love child and affair with a campaign videographer. John Edwards eventually admitted to the affair, but he denied that the love child was his. Turns out, Lewis, he didn't love the kid. Andrew Young, a campaign aide, said that the kid was his and not Edwards. Perhaps after realizing he was pretty far into this thing, John Edwards came clean and told all. Edwards pleaded with the guy to falsely accept responsibility for the child when it actually was John Edwards' kid. Young also claimed that he would set up private meetings between Edwards and the mistress. Young even wrote that Edwards calmed his mistress and told her that after this, I don't even know what it is that he told her, Lewis.
after his wife died, he would marry her on a New York rooftop. I can't believe I shouldn't be laughing about this. And that the Dave Matthews Band would play for them.
Yeah, and John Edwards, I have to admit, I really felt very positive about John Edwards when he was a candidate, a Democratic primary candidate in years past. He was like one of the smarter guys. He was pragmatic. He was progressive. There was so much that I liked about him. And he ended up doing all of this shady stuff while his wife was battling cancer. Ultimately, she did pass away from that cancer. Just really not a good guy at all. Really one of the most wretched personalities that we've seen in Democratic politics, don't you think?
And, he didn't win the nomination, but I guess he should have won an Oscar, at least for a while, because it was quite a performance. Ultimately, he was found not guilty on one count of campaign.
Of course.
Using his campaign finance money to hide the affair.
Yeah.
There were mistrials on all other counts. Great actor, though.
Just an incredible story. And for everybody who says we only talk about right-wing misbehavior and corruption, not at all. We do and have talked about John Edwards so many times, and really just not a good guy. There's no other way to say it. Although some would say, oh, he was the victim of circumstance and his life led him to be in the situation to make these choices. We can't blame him. And I understand childhood trauma and all of these circumstantial things, but some level of personal responsibility also needs to be applied.
I think so. Yeah. We can't we can't say that he might have had, that he had the best relationship ever with his wife, but the thing with the love child, I mean, just be an honest person. If you're not an honest person, we clearly don't want you in office.
Telling some other random person to take responsibility for a kid you had with a mistress is pretty low.
You imagine when you signed up to be a campaign aide, no one imagines that they will end up taking responsibility for a love child for that person.
1 year ago this week, the right wing responded to the release of Army Sgt. Bowe Bergdahl. John Boehner called for hearings regarding his release. Remember that Bowe Bergdahl was held captive by the Taliban for close to 6 years. He was released as part of a prisoner exchange in which 5 Taliban members were released from Guantanamo Bay. He was called a traitor by many Americans. There was a letter that he sent to his parents right before his capture where he said he was ashamed to be an American, that was used by the right to make him seem sort of like he was sympathizing with terrorists. And now we are actually going to see what happens with the allegation that he was a deserter. Remember at the time, Lewis, right-wingers were saying, we shouldn't be trading for someone who's a deserter. And we said at the time, you need to have charges and then a trial to determine if someone is a deserter. He may well be a deserter, but because he is accused of being one does not mean that the United States no longer has a responsibility to this individual. We have him back. He has now been charged with desertion and some other misbehavior as well, I believe. And hearings will start next month, and then we will see.
Yeah, it has not been in the media really at all. Of course, it's kind of disappeared, but perhaps once the hearings start back up, we'll have another media frenzy. I'm very curious to see what happens here. If he is found guilty of desertion and these other charges, the right wing is going to go crazy.
Yeah, but the thing is, it will be completely unwarranted because, first of all, what if he was charged and then found not guilty? Right? Just because he has been charged, we have a system of law here. This is an American. This is someone that was available to be traded for. And that's what we did. We have a responsibility to this individual. And I know you're right. The right wing is going to go crazy if he is ultimately found to be guilty of desertion. But the suspicion of a crime, if you're going to stick to Bill Cosby is not guilty of anything because he hasn't been charged or convicted, then you have to say that Bowe Bergdahl has to be afforded all of the same protections and privileges and rights that anybody would be afforded as someone serving our country overseas. Merely because there is a suspicion of desertion, you can't treat him differently.
The thing is, if that letter were never sent, never written, never became public, we probably wouldn't be talking about this at all right now.
That letter, it was the catalyst for a lot of this controversy.
Yeah, so I guess, think twice before you write your parents a letter.
Yeah, and certainly Lewis adheres to that. Lewis will not write his parents any letters. I am sure it is because he is worried at some point it could be held against him and prevent a prisoner swap from getting Lewis back in the contiguous 48 states. I'm sure that's why you don't write letters to your parents, right?
Why risk it? That's what I say.
Last thing you want is that letter being evidence in some kind of federal trial, right?
Yes, although I think I'll be avoiding federal trials. Yeah, that's my goal.
Join us on the bonus show. Lewis hosts the bonus show. I am the sidekick on the bonus show. All subscribers through the membership program get access to that bonus show. You can sign up today at davidpakman.com/membership.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
This week's classic interview, we will go back to the concept of a guaranteed job. We've talked a little bit about Switzerland and some other discussions of a guaranteed income, which is if you guarantee people a certain level of income that gets them out of the poverty line, you then save a lot of money on welfare benefits and other benefits, and it may actually be better for the economy because you're not going through middlemen with regard to the distribution of that money. We were joined about a year and a half ago by Pavlina Tcherneva, who's assistant professor of economics at Bard College, and she had a very different concept from guaranteed income, which is guaranteed job. And right now, with the newfound populism we're hearing from Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren that is becoming more and more popular amongst Americans, I think it's an interesting time to go back and check out a discussion about something that is very, very populist, which is a guaranteed job, not a guaranteed income. Let's check it out. I'm joined today by economist Pavlina Tcherneva. She is assistant professor of economics at Bard College and a research scholar at the Levy Economics Institute. It's really great to have you today. You know, we've spoken about the Swiss idea of an income guarantee, and you have a video in which you actually discuss the idea of a job guarantee. So let's kind of start most broadly to begin with. What is the general idea of the job guarantee?
Yes, sure. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. The job guarantee is a policy that basically is an employment safety net. We have a variety of safety nets, but the one that's missing is an employment safety net to those who want to work and do not wish to take unemployment insurance or various other income support options. So basically, it's an ongoing program. It's not just a program that we put in place today, we phase out tomorrow, so that the economy recovers and then it's shut down. It's actually an employment safety net that is an ongoing, because the unemployment problem is an ongoing problem.
So let's talk about the logistics of that. Where do the jobs come from? Who creates the jobs? Who determines what person is assigned particular jobs, etc.?
Okay, so there are a number of proposals on how you could run this. The one that I prefer is that it's a federally funded program, the way safety nets are funded in general, but they are locally administered and locally run. And in particular, I've argued for a strong role for the traditional nonprofit sector and the nonprofit social entrepreneurial ventures. So basically, you have a policy that says the following. If you would like to work, you've been looking for work, you can't find employment, we make a promise that we will find you a decent job at a decent wage benefit package in the social services sector. So what you could do is simply scale up work that's already existing on the ground, work that's already being done by nonprofits and these various nonprofit social entrepreneurial ventures, because they actually deal with very specific needs and they deal with them in a sense in a counter-cyclical manner. They need to do more work when times are bad, and they do less work when times are good.
So this is interesting. And, the one that comes to mind is here in New York City, for example, the foster care system is drastically understaffed. There is just an incredible need for people to work cases within the foster care system as advocates, etc. And it stands to reason that if times are bad, that need might increase. However, there's just no funding. The city and state have no funding to hire people. So those are jobs that are needed, but there is no funding for. So there the question becomes, who funds it? Is the federal government simply paying this wage out of their pocket, so to speak?
Yes. It's a program that will be federally funded, but then run by states or localities, as you suggest. So it's important that the federal government funds this, just like with any social safety net. It doesn't jeopardize the existence of the social safety net when the federal government funds it, where states can run into real trouble with their budgets, and they have balanced budget amendments, various other reasons why they actually are not able to sustain these programs. So we federally fund Social Security, Medicare, various other programs. So the job guarantee provides both. It provides the funding, but also it provides the staff, the manpower that is necessary to staff all these various projects that we need. And, you know, when the New Deal did direct employment in somewhat similar fashion, about 80% or more of the expenditures was on wages and benefits. And there are other programs that we could look to where we could see that a large portion of the funding is dedicated to wages. You could do some funding of materials. You could do a public-private partnership where the nonprofits contribute to the resources. For example, they can contribute with the place of work, with the infrastructure they already have for the execution of these projects.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the gripes that the American right would have with such a proposal. You know, I get emails all the time when we discuss unemployment insurance, which is that it is essentially insurance for the lazy. And this was one of the criticisms of the Swiss guaranteed income proposal. If you had a guaranteed job program like the one we're talking about here, would this completely eliminate unemployment insurance? Because if you are unemployed and can't find a job, the government gives you a job and therefore eliminate that entire structure? Or would it be in addition to that?
Okay, it is in addition to that. So that's a very good question. It's important to understand what the JG, the job guarantee, is not. First, it's not a welfare. It's not just a handout, and it's not a workfare. You know, we're going to take away your unemployment insurance and we're going to give it to you only if you work in this project. Absolutely not. This is an assurance. This is an option, an employment option that is in addition to the various programs that we already have in existence. And there is an argument to be made about beefing up some of these income supports. I will make a very strong argument for boosting Social Security, veteran benefits. But this is an additional program that provides an employment option to those who wish to work for the public purpose. It's not a workfare where people are mandated to work in exchange for their benefits.
So then the question becomes, what are the broad macroeconomic implications of such a program? If you are adding an expenditure for the government, are you making it up somewhere else? How are you taking it in? How is this funded in a way that is not going to? And again, we can have the debate over whether the absolute amount of deficit is or is not a problem. But factually speaking, will this be a deficit neutral, negative, or positive program?
All right. So the way that I would look at this issue is not to look at the size of the deficit as an indicator of the success of the program. The funding is a separate matter. And when we are talking about a government like the United States, unlike governments in Europe that have control over their central bank and their treasury, they fund the programs they commit to. So just like Social Security, if we commit to a program like this, it will be funded, and the measure of success will not be the size of the deficit. But I will make a strong argument to say that this program is actually counter-cyclical. And so the way that it will evolve through time is that the program will expand when times are really bad. And that in itself provides the stimulus that is needed to kickstart economic growth. But when that growth comes, people are then able to transition to better paying jobs, better employment opportunities in the private sector. Then expenditure on the very program shrinks. And so the deficit, as it may be, will likely shrink.
And not only that, presumably then tax revenues increase because those individuals are moving to jobs that pay more, and therefore that may actually increase the amount of tax revenue for the government.
Well, that would matter very much for states. Absolutely. States very much depend on tax revenue. For the federal government actually doesn't fund itself per se out of tax revenue. It is a issuer of its currency. It basically funds itself by appropriating budgets for its various programs. But it's very important for the states, absolutely, that economic growth increases, that tax revenue increases at the state level, and that, of course, improves their overall budget position. But what is very important here is that we are spending money, and at the same time, we're also producing something of social value. It's not just spending money that supports the unemployed, which is the right thing to do, of course. In bad times, you have to provide some income safety net. But the program itself actually produces social useful output. And that's an additional benefit. And I would focus on the real benefits of this program far more on the sort of financial accounting results.
Sure, and that's, I think, where a lot of the analyses, even when we talk about small increases to the minimum wage, get lost, which is, let's forget for just a second, not that it isn't important, the effect on the business owner paying a higher wage, but let's talk about the broader economic impact of everyone having a little bit, or at least those who are at the minimum wage, having a little more money in their pocket. That seems to be the most important consideration.
Absolutely. Just think of this economy, which currently has about 25 million people who are either without a job or with very precarious employment, underemployed. Now think of an economy that has 25 million people working at a decent job, at decent pay. They are not all going to be in the job guarantee, by no means, because the very expenditure on the program is going to create so much economic growth that cash registers are going to be ringing in the private sector, and the private sector will demand workers. So many people who are looking for work will actually find employment in the private sector.
I think that's a key point. And then, of course, which we don't have time for, but we could also calculate the decreased expenditure on programs for people who qualify based on low income. Those would decrease, and certainly we could round that conversation out. We've been speaking with Professor Pavlina Tcherneva. She is Assistant Professor of Economics at Bard College and a research scholar at the Levy Economics Institute. Thanks so much for doing this. A pleasure to have you on.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's that time of the week, time to answer your questions. Submit the questions via email, voicemail, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. What else do we have? I guess that's mostly it. However you want to submit the questions, submit them. First question from Alan. Hey guys, have you thought of who the new host is going to be on your channel when you go to Boston? Will you consider people from the audience? What will the requirements be? Do you have specific people in mind? Way ahead of us, Alan. So yes, we're doing an Indiegogo campaign right now, which, by the way, you can pull up at igg.me/at/TDPS10 and you can contribute. One of the things we want to do when we move the studio to Boston is to have a new host who will be able to co-host with me sometimes, do their own original content, do some investigative journalism, but also fill in for me when I'm off. Instead of running an old show, we can have new shows even on days that I'm off. So that's the idea. We don't yet have anybody in mind. We will consider people from the audience. Of course, we'll consider anybody. The requirements will be you have to be in or willing to travel to Boston on a multiple times a week basis. That would be number one. Number two, you have to be progressive, right? I mean, if we're a progressive show, it's great to have opposing ideas, but we're looking for a progressive. And you will also have to have some experience doing either audio or video broadcasting, because right now we don't really have the resources to train someone from the ground up. So it will ideally be someone with some on-camera or on-mic experience, as well as some tech skills, so that they could do some editing of their own pieces. That's all we know so far, Lewis.
Yeah, of course, it's very important to have examples of whoever this person is doing some type of television or radio broadcast. I mean, if we can't see how they perform on air, what they sound like, how they act, how fluid they are, then, it'd be a total crapshoot, and we can't have that.
No, and of course we could have people do screen tests and stuff like that, but I think for our first new host, it would have to be someone with some experience. And then once we have, hopefully, the ability to build a sort of bullpen of great people, then we can look at, we bring in interns, for example, which we would probably do anyway once we go to Boston. And interns would have the opportunity to say, hey, I really think I could do a video piece for you. Let me try. And we know of many shows where people have started that way and have ended up being the hosts of programs. So yeah, we're not really discriminating in any way as far as the background, education level, or anything like that. For this person, it will be someone who has some tech skills, some hosting skills, and is in the Boston area and is in a progressive. It's going to be wide open, and I'm actually super excited about it.
Yes, it's going to be interesting. Tech skills, definitely a must. If I think in this business, if you are not at least somewhat tech savvy, working in a small outfit like ours, you got to have those skills.
Absolutely. Being able to edit, or at least partially edit, your own pieces, run your own microphone, set up a camera so you can then do a stand-up in front of it. The basics have to be known by individuals. And a lot of that stuff is much easier to teach than being comfortable in front of a camera or being articulate and fluid in your delivery. Which is something that you might not necessarily even be able to teach someone. I mean, that may be, an intangible. Yeah, yes, absolutely. So very exciting stuff. We will have, we'll announce when we're starting to consider people, because I know there's already 15 or 20 people in our audience that have expressed interest who are in the Boston area. Next question today is from Callie. Callie says, your show started in a more rural area and then moved to New York City, and next you will be moving to Boston. Do you prefer urban or rural areas? What do you like about each? Well, so at this point, I certainly prefer urban areas. There are annoyances with urban areas and with cities. There's no question about it. You have to deal with traffic. You have to deal with greater costs. But for me, there's something that you get, an intangible, when you have a certain population density combined with certain density of high-level businesses and certain density of universities and colleges that exists in urban areas. That's just a really great vibe and buzz that you just don't get in more suburban or rural areas, like where the program started in Western Massachusetts. So I like being in calmer areas sometimes, but for me, I think that being in a city is certainly more stimulating. I think that is my preference, although I like the ability to get out of that city when I want to and go hiking or go wherever, right?
Yeah, that's what's nice about the rural areas, where we used to live. I mean, it's, there are cities and towns, different sizes all over the place, 30,000, I think 32,000. It's, it's still small, but it's not tiny. And so you still have, it's not a food desert. We still had the restaurants. We still had some nice bars. You still have the movie theaters, and you still have all of that. But yes, you could drive 10 minutes in a certain direction and be in complete wilderness almost.
Now, let me make another point, though, Lewis, because the Western Massachusetts area is very different. Lewis is thinking of Northampton, Massachusetts, where we started, a small city of about 30,000 people. The reason that Northampton had a lot of the vibe and things that you're talking about is not because it's 30,000 people. Because if you go to the Midwest, to a town of 30,000, you will not have the same thing necessarily that you have in Western Massachusetts. You have a sort of knowledge corridor from Northampton down to Hartford, Connecticut, which has nearly 1 million people. You have a dozen colleges and universities. You have the cultural elements that are there by virtue of being halfway between Boston and New York City. So it was a unique spot. I've been to towns of 30,000 in the Southwest and in the Midwest, and it is a very, very different story. Not to make a value judgment that it's better or worse, but it is very different.
Fair enough. There are both, certainly, but I do like being able to be away from it all. Much harder to do in a place like New York City or Boston, but I have been living in Austin, and I have enjoyed what the city has to offer. So, I can appreciate both. Which do I prefer? I would, it's tough to say. I guess I'd like to be in an urban area where I have access to something a bit more quiet.
Yeah, well, in Boston, if all goes well with the fundraiser, you will have 25 minutes away what is known in literature, ingrained as one of the most tranquil and peaceful places in the world, Walden Pond, the infamous Walden Pond, only 25 minutes, although I don't know how much of a tourist attraction it is now, so maybe it's not quite so calm, but at least on paper, it's one of the most emblematic, tranquil places anyone can go to.
Well, that's, I'm sure things have changed since it was written about, but I guess we'll see.
Last question today is from Nicole. What would you do if you won the lottery? I have an interesting answer to this one. I'm going to let Lewis go first, though.
I would probably just travel all the time, everywhere. I would, that's where my money would go, at least until I got sick of it. And, other than that, I'm not really sure what I would do, but traveling would be number one.
I would take a bunch of the money and I would certainly travel, but then I would take a bunch of the money and I would put it into the show and I would keep hosting this show because I just like doing that. So interestingly enough, I think that if I won the lottery, I would use it to grow this program where we could have a whole bunch of hosts, maybe our own distribution platform, and I would keep hosting the show and we would keep doing media, but I would probably take more vacations to travel. I admit that. There's a lot of places that I would like to see. I think that's kind of a good question to ask to figure out what if you won the lottery, what job would you like to do? That can be a good way to illuminate whether you're actually doing something that you like. I find a lot of people I talk to, they say, if I won the lottery, I'd be doing something completely different. And I always say to them, well, maybe you should look at doing something completely different now.
Yeah, that is good advice. I also enjoy doing this program, and I think I would like to continue doing it. I would just like David said, want to take more vacations.
You might build studios at multiple homes, so no matter where you are, you could just sit down and you could produce the show.
Exactly, that would be easy, and that would be definitely I would do that. I would have the winter home, the summer home. I would also have
the fall home and the spring home.
No. That's a bit much. I don't want to be like John McCain and not remember how many homes I have.
That would be bad. If you ever don't remember, if I ever get to the point where, because of the success of this program, that at some point will hopefully happen, I don't know how many homes I have, please slap me.
I will do that. A very, very firm slap. I would also, if I won the lottery, I would also buy all that guitar equipment that I've always wanted, because that stuff is outrageously expensive. And that would be another one.
I would also, I don't have a lot of money to give to charity, so I don't think quite as seriously about if I had a ton of money to give away, how would I do it? But if I had a ton of money to give, if I won the lottery, and we're talking some big Powerball jackpot thing, I would definitely think very carefully about where could I give money where I would have the most impact. And I think Bill Gates has done a pretty good job of this, where he says, where will my dollars impact the lives of the most number of people, highest number of people as possible, in the most significant degree? And is it vaccines in Africa? Is it developing a certain type of condom, which he did a campaign to do? I would really think hard about that, because that would be really important also.
Yes, but you could also do your own philanthropic work, because that would also be something that could occupy your time and you may enjoy doing it. And so that would be an option too.
You could, but remember, Warren Buffett, one of the richest people around, he said, I actually am just going to give my money to the Bill Gates Foundation, because he's already gone through the process of scaling up and putting in infrastructure. I'm not going to be able to do better if I start my own thing from scratch. So I'll give the money to his foundation to do what I know they will do with it. So there's two ways to think about that.
That is true. Yes. I guess it just depends on, maybe it depends on your personality type.
That is it for this week. Other than the bonus show, go to davidpakman.com/membership to sign up. And remember, we're in the middle of a fundraiser. Any contribution you can make is a huge help to the expansion of the show. Go to davidpakman.com and click on the Indiegogo banner, or just type into your browser igg.me/at/TDPS10. Monday, I will have an update for you about the campaign and where it stands after 1 week.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.